Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw on TVP World. 2 million people have been left without access to water, several 100,000 people without electricity. There are dead and wounded, including children. This is the result of another brutal Russian attack on Ukraine. Of course, according to Moscow, only military targets were attacked. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Trump threatens massive tariffs on China as Beijing restricts rare earth exports. Underground shelters save lives in an attack, so how well is Poland prepared? It's World Mental Health Day, a call for action to make mental health care accessible to all. We start off tonight in Ukraine, where 6 civilians, including a child, were killed and at least 45 people were wounded. Another wave of Russian aerial attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure has resulted in blackouts in some districts of the capital. Domestic gas production has also been hard hit, forcing Kyiv to scramble for imports ahead of winter. Randy Potts brings you this Ukraine update.
Overnight, Russian drones and missiles rained down on Kyiv, attacking both energy facilities and civilian housing. And all across the capital Friday morning, electricity was out and homes blackened from missile fire.
To be honest, there is no power and I am not in a good mood. But I have faith that everything will be fine. There is no water, nothing. But we are Ukrainians, we are the strongest nation, and we will keep living our best life despite everything.
In spite of increasing civilian casualties, Ukrainian morale seems as strong as ever. Odessa was also hit in the strikes, prompting the Odessa Philharmonic to move the choir into the cellar, where they continued their performance. As winter approaches, Russian forces, as they have done every fall since 2022, are focusing on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Last week, Moscow hit several of Ukraine's main gas production facilities, causing considerable damage, prompting a response from Zelensky.
It is precisely the civilian and energy infrastructure that is the main target of Russia's strikes ahead of the heating season.
We know that the power plant is damaged because half of the city has no power, no electricity, no water. There is no water in my apartment. There won't be also the electricity, but the building is using the generator. So at least I have a light at home. But the left side of the city is in blackout for now.
On Friday, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski traveled to Ukraine to rally support and pay respects to Ukrainian casualties in the war.
Together with Radosław Sikorski and Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Oleksandr Mishchenko, we visited the scene of the vile Russian strike on civilians in Łapaivka. We honor the memory of innocent people whose lives were taken by the enemy. This loss is an open wound for the Lviv region and all of Ukraine.
The Russian Defense Ministry said on Thursday that Ukrainian forces had blown up an ammonia pipeline near the settlement of Rusin Yar in the Donetsk region. The released video has not been confirmed by experts or Ukraine. For TVP World, Randy Potts.
I don't see Europe acting as quickly as it probably should. This is the warning from U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whittaker, regarding Europe's sluggish pace meeting its defensive needs. It comes on the heels of finance ministers discussing the plausibility of handing Ukraine a reparations loan to supercharge its own security. More on this from our EU correspondent Angela Skujins in Brussels.
U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whittaker blasted his allies in Brussels for what he sees as a sluggish pace to meet the new NATO funding benchmark. The historical 2% of GDP was revised up in the middle of the year at the Hague summit to 5%. However, according to Whittaker, not enough allies in the European continent are moving fast enough to meet this new target, as well as addressing the current demands of war.
There are lessons to be learned on the battlefield in Ukraine, no doubt. Right now, you can't even get very close to the front line in Ukraine because of the drone and electronic warfare situation. So it's a different battlefield that we expect to fight, and we need to be very strong in those matters, and we're just not producing anywhere close to enough.
In Luxembourg, finance ministers also wanted to address how to better arm Ukraine on the front lines. This could be addressed through reparations loans spearheaded by the European Commission. Now, those 27 finance ministers met on Friday to hammer out the major challenges regarding this proposal. What we heard at a press conference following this meeting, that the broad challenges remain, particularly regarding how to convince certain member states, such as Belgium, that this is not an illegal move. It'll be up to the European Commissioner for the Economy, Valdis Dombrovskis, to continue his work on convincing those 27 allies at the upcoming European Council summit that this money can be used for Ukraine's armament and to repel Russian aggression. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Over 250 delegates from 32 NATO countries met in Slovenia for the alliance's annual Parliamentary Assembly, a forum for setting defense priorities. This year's focus: closing Europe's capability gaps and sustaining support for Ukraine. Now to our defense correspondent, Zuzana Jurek.
From Russia's hybrid warfare to financing pan-European defense sector, these are just some of the themes which are expected to be on top of the agenda for a parliamentary meeting of the NATO alliance in Slovenian capital of Ljubljana. But apart from those, the president of the parliamentary Assembly has underlined some of the other challenges which will be sought to be addressed over the course of this weekend.
I would choose two. First, the need to strengthen the alliance capabilities, and especially the ones that European countries should have to face the threats, the risk threats that are over Europe coming now from Russia. Russia is not threatening just anymore Ukraine. Now it's clear for everybody due to the last airspace violations, due to the hybrid attacks that many countries had suffered in the last years, but now recently more evident. Russia is not threatening just Ukraine, it's threatening all Europe and some of the allies.
And in order to address these challenges, over the course of Saturday and Sunday, a number of specialized committees will be held as pertaining to defense, security, politics, economics and technology. This will also include cooperation with Ukraine, between Ukraine and NATO alliance, as well as potential EU expansion to countries such as Moldova and Kosovo. Importantly, these sessions will culminate during a plenary session on Monday, during which a resolution will be passed, which will dictate the direction of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, aiming to implement some of the goals which have been established during the Hague Summit back in June. From Ljubljana, for TVP World, Zuzana Jurek.
On Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump made it clear he has no intention of meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping after Beijing's announcement of export restrictions on rare earth minerals. Trump not only dismissed the need for talks, but also threatened a new wave of even higher tariffs on Chinese goods, along with other retaliatory measures. The message is unmistakable. The United States-China trade war is edging toward an even more confrontational phase. Maciej Wilowski has the details in this report.
Trade tensions are heating up again after China deployed the latest tool in its geopolitical arsenal: export controls. On Thursday, China expanded its restrictions on exports of rare earths, adding 5 more elements to the list. Rare earths are a category of 17 metals mined from the earth, which are critical components in some of the world's most sophisticated tech products, from smartphones and electric vehicles to aircraft engines and military radars. China contains over a third of the world's rare earth deposits and accounts for roughly 70% of global production. And when it comes to processing rare earths, that share rises to over 90%, allowing China to dominate the global supply chain. Supply chains for products that require rare earths, like electric vehicles and wind turbines, could become disrupted, and Europe could feel the impact.
It would be really a critical point for the European Union, for not only the car industry, automotive industry, but also for wind turbines and many other sophisticated equipment produced by the European Union.
It could also negatively impact the U.S. economy and its defense industry. The U.S. imports most of its rare earths from China, and these are used extensively in manufacturing. Production of key military equipment, such as fighter jets and radar systems, relies heavily on rare earths. Perhaps for those reasons, U.S. President Donald Trump reacted forcefully to China's announcement on Friday, threatening to cancel upcoming trade talks in South Korea and re-escalate his trade war with China.
I was to meet President Xi in 2 weeks at APEC in South Korea, but now there seems to be no reason to do so. One of the policies that we are calculating at this moment is a massive increase of tariffs on Chinese products coming into the United States of America.
Earlier this year, Trump briefly imposed tariffs as high as 145% on China. That rate was eventually lowered to 30% after the U.S. and China reached a tentative trade truce in May, pledging no new tariffs on each other for 3 months. The truce was extended for another 90 days in August and is set to expire in November. With trade relations between Washington and Beijing seemingly breaking down once again, the outlook for the global economy is becoming more uncertain. For TVP World, I'm Maciej Wilowski.
After more than 3.5 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, the world has been made very aware just how important underground shelters are for civilian populations. Now, with the growing threat of Russian aggression on NATO's eastern flank, countries like Poland are hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. So how well is the country, especially the capital Warsaw, equipped to protect its civilian population in the event of an attack? Anastasia Yanchenko reports.
This autumn has shown that the threat of drones, rockets and war is no longer distant. 19 drones have already violated Polish airspace, while neighboring NATO states reported numerous airspace violations. The logical question that comes to mind for many in Warsaw is the capital truly ready to protect its civilians and where to hide from the possible air attacks? To see an example of a shelter where locals could sit through air attacks in Warsaw, we drove to the Bemowo district, home to around 118,000 residents. Here, under the local city hall, there is a bunker with 15 sections, including showers, multiple rooms, a small area that could serve as a medical station, and air filtration facilities, as well as a long tunnel leading out to the street, which in pinch could hold around 100 people. But Warsaw is home to around 3 million people. We went to Warsaw City Hall to discuss the current situation.
In the capital, there are roughly 200 bunkers, 1,300 hidden shelters, and over 16,000 temporary refuge sites. But this is just a preliminary breakdown.
However, this does not mean that all of these facilities are ready to protect people from attacks, as each of these sites has to be checked for suitability for civil defense use.
So far, we have inspected around 160 sites. About 70 partially meet the requirements, while a similar number do not. Facility managers are receiving guidance from the fire department on what needs to be fixed.
According to the Polish Interior Ministry, the checks are planned to be completed by the end of 2025.
We're planning to launch efforts to build new facilities and upgrade existing shelters in early 2026.
In Poland, nearly 4 billion euro were allocated for 2025 for efforts outlined by the Civil Protections and Civil Defense Act. According to the ministry, a similar amount is planned for 2026.
This is the first time in its history that Poland has passed a Civil Protection Act and allocated considerable funds to efforts like these. Out of the earmarked funds, over 1 billion euro is designated specifically for the modernization and construction of new shelters.
We went out onto the streets of Warsaw to see whether people actually know where to go when the sirens ring out.
I have no idea. I live nearby, but it never really interested me. Maybe in the basement of my building?
In the basement of the building or between the walls? I don't know.
To help residents, Poland launched its own shelters app. However, it is still being updated as inspections continue.
While we inspect and prepare the facilities, it's very important for local residents to familiarize themselves with key information provided on official government websites and to consolidate that knowledge. It's also useful, for example, to have an evacuation backpack ready.
Just for comparison, Finland offers one of the best examples of civil defense. Every Finnish citizen has a designated shelter space. These facilities often resemble underground cities, equipped with gyms, basketball courts, and even playgrounds, designed to make people feel comfortable. Back in Warsaw, as modernization continues, local authorities and security services recommend that residents read and follow all officially published guidelines. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
85 years after the Soviet Union carried out mass deportations of Poles to Siberia, a Polish delegation joined by veterans of Anders' army and former deportees returned to Central Asia, not only to honor a painful shared history, but to build new bridges of cooperation in science, culture, and diplomacy. Natalia Komorov has more.
Polish World War II veterans, as well as children of Siberian deportees, were invited by Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to commemorate the 85th anniversary of mass deportations to Siberia. Between October 7 and 10, multiple ceremonies were held in cemeteries across the two Central Asian states.
When I remember those days, my heart bleeds and tears fill up my eyes. As a 3-week-old infant, I was arrested and deported to faraway Siberia.
My whole family was deported from Volhynia, and then the Anders army began forming, and they all rushed to join.
The Soviet Union began mass deportations in February of 1940. Around 100,000 Poles were exiled to the gulags of Siberia and Central Asia. But then in 1941, after Hitler invaded the USSR, Stalin allowed those Poles to join the army of Polish General Władysław Anders. Tens of thousands rushed to enlist in designated spots across modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, often on foot.
Only one group of Poles was initially deported to Uzbekistan. Those who ended up here would have taken all possible roads to make it into the Anders army.
Only a fourth of deportees managed to join the army. Many died trying.
Our trail here is legitimized by the cemeteries across Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Symbolic graves have been constructed to remember those who marched and marched, but never made it. And now their bodies mark our trail of freedom.
All the cemeteries in Uzbekistan are being taken care of by local communities. There are no incidents of vandalism or misbehavior. It's very touching, and I know that tours from Poland make sure to visit those places of memory.
Every year, fewer veterans of the Anders army remain, but the ceremonies organized this year by Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan prove their histories being remembered both in Poland and in Central Asia.
We should think about the message that sends us today, what the soldiers of General Anders did here. And I believe the message is that we need to stand united and we need to be strong.
For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
October 10th marks World Mental Health Day, serving as a powerful reminder that there is no health without mental health. With over 123 million people displaced worldwide last year, most end up in countries lacking necessary resources. Even in countries like Poland, where mental health awareness is growing, the reality is sobering. There are up to 7,500 people per psychiatrist. This is not just a number, it's a crisis. Aisha Bachi reports.
Caring for our minds is as important as looking after our bodies.
Exhale, fold.
World Mental Health Day serves as a reminder of how important mental well-being is. And this year's theme is mental health in humanitarian emergencies. A nationwide survey from Ukrainian Red Cross with 144,000 respondents indicates that 56% of people in Ukraine report needing psychological support either immediately or on a regular basis.
Home should be a haven of peace, the foundation of what we build throughout our lives. Without peace, it's simply impossible to build that.
Poland's National Health Fund defines mental health as not only the absence of mental illness or disorders, but rather a complete well-being and the ability to realize one's potential. But even in safe cities, other factors may negatively impact mental health.
There's even a phenomenon called digital stress, because we're always on our phones and social media. It affects all generations. It turns out we're becoming increasingly addicted to dopamine.
To the point that in some countries like Denmark, social media may be banned for children under 15.
Never before have so many children and young people suffered from anxiety and depression as now.
But studies show mental health of Poles is closely linked to their professional lives. Nearly 11% of sick leave days are prompted by mental disorders.
It turns out that we're all overworked, no matter what position we hold. Many people are burned out and stressed because of work.
There has also been a strong focus on addressing the specific mental health needs of children and young people.
For the Polish government, mental health-related policies are currently an important issue. This is also reflected in the fact that our helpline for children and young people, 116-111, has been funded by the state since last year.
End the stigma and the discrimination. That's the goal of World Mental Health Day.
It is still uncomfortable for people to talk about, especially like in this region of Europe. It's just people very rarely, especially men as well, very rarely talk about mental health and stuff. And I think we need to destigmatize it.
If you find yourself in psychological distress or struggling with negative thoughts, reach out to your loved ones or call your local mental health crisis hotline. For TVP World, this is Aisha Badja.
Ukraine had another night of devastating attacks with 465 Shahed drones and 32 cruise and ballistic missiles fired on the country. 6 people were killed, including a child, and at least 45 people were injured. Critical infrastructure is also being targeted, with 60% of Ukraine's domestic supply of natural gas being taken offline and its power grid in tatters. Now, joining me to discuss these and other issues in Ukraine is Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Good evening, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's great to see you again.
Great to see you.
Yes, now I remember in the fall of 2022 being in Kyiv when the biggest, at the time, Russian attack on the country's energy infrastructure took place. What really struck my mind then is just how quickly Ukraine recovered. And of course, we've seen that story of resilience ever since. But now with the energy grids in such tatters, do you think that this could be a different winner for Ukrainians?
You know, I don't actually. I am just amazed, as you were, by the ability of the Ukrainian utility worker to fix things. And I'll give you a very recent example. We have a friend in Sumy Oblast who works in one of the natural gas facilities that was being targeted. And in that region, they lost all natural gas 2 days ago. And today they have it back. And, you know, these guys are so good that the Ukrainian post office has made a stamp declaring them heroes. So I feel the same way, you know. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot of damage that Putin's trying to do. And I don't think it's really going to make a difference to the Ukrainian people, who are just hardened and resilient.
Indeed. Now, 60% is what they're saying of domestic gas production has been taken offline. You just mentioned an instance of it being brought back on. The estimates right now are about 4 billion euros that Ukraine may need to import this year. You know, do you think that they are going to accomplish this? Are the international banks going to help? And maybe they don't even need that exact number, but maybe it'll be hopefully less.
Well, you know who needs to step up their game here is Belgium. Belgium has bought something on the order of $6.5 billion worth of liquid natural gas from Russia, which Russia uses to build missiles and drones that do the damage like this to Ukraine's infrastructure. And Belgium also controls $200 billion worth of frozen Russian assets that could be used to really make a difference here. And they're not. And and they're talking. With friends like Belgium, who needs enemies?
Exactly. Well, they've been talking for a long time. It's 3.5 years already. Well, we've also seen these Russian attacks from the sky drastically increase this year. In January, Russia was using about 83 Shahed drones per day. Now the average in September was 187. And Ukraine is still waiting on critical air defense systems from the West. Is it likely that these waves will have even more drones and even more devastation in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, Vladimir Putin stops when someone makes him stop. And I don't know if you've been following the Baltic Security Initiative, but on September 4th of this year, the Pentagon said that they're questioning whether they're going to renew funding for it. And on September 19th of this year, the Russians sent 3 MiG fighters into Estonian airspace. And actually, the attack on Poland was just slightly after the United States signaled weakness on the Baltic Security Initiative. So my point here is that when you stand up to Putin, he stops, but that needs to be done. Someone needs to stand up to him. Someone needs to tell him that this is not going to be acceptable. This continued attacks on civilians, and NATO, the United States, Europe, Belgium is going to do something about it.
Which brings us to Tomahawks. We heard Donald Trump say he thinks he's decided already on providing those Tomahawks to NATO to go ahead and give them to Ukraine. And then, of course, the United States will be involved in some of the targeting. We've seen, again, President Putin saying that they will make no difference on the battlefield, but that this would completely destroy any of these new relations between the United States and Russia. Is this the move that you're talking about? Do you think that these Tomahawks will be that tough move that Vladimir Putin needs to maybe reconsider his position?
Well, I've been in Ukraine for 3.5 years. I've been watching Putin for all those 3.5 years. We've been watching him very closely. And there's one thing I figured out. There's one surefire way to tell if Putin is lying, and that is if his lips are moving. So he is lying. And, it is actually true that they will make a difference on the battlefield. They'll do more for the Ukrainians to help them take out Russia is a gas station with an army, and Ukraine has been very highly skilled at this point of taking out the gas station. The Tomahawks will help with that. And of course, Putin, what new relationships with Putin? I was really heartened to see the First Lady, Melania Trump, take on the issue of Ukrainian children being abducted by Russia. Today, she got 8 back, which is a great start. But Putin will tell you himself they have 730,000 children from Ukraine inside Russia. And so, and while he returned 8 children, he killed 9 civilians in Ukraine. So listen, I think it is fantastic. I've been working on this issue of abducted children as well for years now. And to see the First Lady take charge like this is really heartening. But I don't think anyone needs to think that it's a real turnaround for Putin.
Yes, I get you. Well, just before we finish up here, I'd like to ask you about Vladimir Putin criticizing the Norwegian Nobel Committee for not awarding Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, there's always next year. What do you think that Donald Trump will have to do in terms of Ukraine to get broad support to receive the Nobel Peace Prize?
Actually, you know what? I think that if you can get Hamas and Israel to stop killing each other, and if he can get a cessation to the fighting here in Ukraine and in Russia, let's give him the prize, man. Look, if he only pulls off one of those, no one else has been able to do it for decades. So, yeah, listen, if Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize and actually figures out how to get peace in this area and in other parts of the world, I'm all for it, man. That's what the Peace Prize is about. So, the tomahawk, oddly enough, now the key to getting peace here in Ukraine is more weapons. So that's
it's kind of a
kind
paradox.
Of thing
It's somewhat of a paradox, but I'm in total agreement with you. Let's give the guy a peace prize. Let's hope he can get it done. Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, really fun. We'll see you again soon.
All right. And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.